Welcome to another edition of the Florida Chamber's Bottom Line. I'm Mark Wilson, President and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And joining me today is Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker.
Governor Walker, I want to thank you very much for being here with the Florida Chamber of Commerce and especially for being here on the Florida Chamber's Bottom Line. Last year, you and I had a chance to meet in Washington, D.C. of all places. The U.S. Chamber was hosting a national jobs summit. And it struck me how much in common Florida and Wisconsin have in terms of the future and the challenges that both states had. Could you tell us a little bit about what the challenges were in Wisconsin and
Sure.
And really what you talked to us about here tonight at the Florida Chamber's annual meeting?
Sure, and you're right. When we met, it was at the U.S. Chamber, and Governor Rick Scott was with me and a couple other governors as well. We talked a lot about some of the same things we're trying to do to get the economy going, to get the power back in the hands of the taxpayers, and that's really what we talked about to your chamber members and talking about now is the fact that we came in our state. We had about a $3.6 billion budget deficit. And we decided we wanted to balance that without raising taxes, without massive layoffs, without cuts in things like Medicaid. And so instead of doing what some other states have done around the country, we balanced it in a way that put in place long-term structural reforms, particularly in collective bargaining. And in doing so, we empowered the taxpayer at both the state and the local level to control their own destiny. It helped not only balance the budget, it helped improve our business climate.
Right. And obviously it was very controversial. The whole nation watched you and your leadership and what happened in Wisconsin, and many of us were rooting for the right thing to be done. I was struck earlier tonight, we heard some numbers, and when you took office, there was a poll that was done. Only 10% of the people that participated in the poll said that Wisconsin was headed in the right direction. But most recently, 94% now say Wisconsin's headed in the right direction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we really fundamentally wanted to change the business climate. And again, some of the things you're trying to do here in the state of Florida as well. And we understood it's not just saying you're open for business, you got to show it. So we lowered taxes. In fact, property taxes went down for the first time in 12 years on a median valued home. It applies to our businesses as well. We improved the business climate there. We repealed the state tax. There's no tax on capital gains, for example, for investments made in companies in Wisconsin. But we also streamlined the regulatory process. So what we enforce is about common sense, not just about bureaucratic red tape, and passed something you guys are really working on, some major tort reform, because we understood that frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits, along with excessive regulations, two of the biggest things our businesses, particularly small businesses, identified as problems. We tackled that right away, along with our fiscal reforms, and in doing so, we saw a tremendous turnaround in terms of what our employers think. 94%. Now, I'm aiming to get 100% soon,
Right.
but 94% from 10% just 2 years ago was a tremendous, tremendous turnaround, and we think that's a testament to the good work that we've done to put the power back in the hands of our taxpayers and our employers.
Right. So you had a front row seat in reforming Wisconsin. Many people like to say that these are partisan issues. But what you talked to our group tonight about is that these are real challenges that even the founders of our nation were dealing with. And I was impressed. You had a $3.6 billion deficit, you said, when you took office. And after your reforms, you now have a surplus for 2 years in a row. How does that happen?
Well, we did a surplus, put more money back in the hands of the taxpayers, and ultimately put money aside in a rainy day fund for the first time ever in 2 consecutive years. Well, it's about priorities, but it's also with collective bargaining reform. You know, for years with collective bargaining the way, and we were the founding state when it came to AFSCME, one of the largest public employee unions in the country, and we took a concept that you're right, isn't partisan. I mean, President Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, raised concerns about public employee unions and the impact on the taxpayers. Mayor LaGuardia in New York and folks. So it's not just Republicans or conservatives, but there's a weird cycle out there. In the past, the cycle was that taxpayers' money was used to pay for legitimate compensation for benefits and pay for public employees. But on top of that, union dues that then went to pay for political purposes. That went to candidates who said, we'll do as much as the unions tell us to do and hire more people, add more benefits, add more costs to taxpayers. And nobody in that loop was looking out for the taxpayers. We said once and for all it was time to draw a line in the sand, put the hardworking taxpayers back in charge at both the state and at the local level. Now in our case, we had to change a law.
Right.
In Florida's case, other states could just do it through an executive order. Most states have to do it through the law. Florida's case, it's part of the Constitution. So you have to make those changes. But around the country, I mean, you look at Rahm Emanuel in the city of Chicago, I mean, obviously a Democrat worked for the President of the United States, President Obama, and yet he was trying to do some of the same things. And had he lived, had Chicago been in Wisconsin, he could have done those without the kind of nonsense that you saw in the city of Chicago. So those are things that other governors of both political parties are pushing for, because we know in the end, whether you want to lower taxes, as a lot of Republicans do, or you want more programs, as some Democrats do, you can't pay for any of them if all the money is being wasted in terms of these unaffordable benefits.
Right. I just have two last questions I'd like you to comment on. First, you talked tonight about this false choice that many governments talk about. Can you tell us what is the false choice and what did you mean by that?
Yeah, it's this false premise that either you have to raise taxes or cut core services. We hear it all the time at the local level, schools and cities and towns, but we hear it a lot at the state and the federal level. And I said it's a false choice because, as your members know, in the private sector, when times are tough, they don't run out and say, I'm going to double the price of my product or cut the quality of my product in half, or people run to their competitors. They do is, whether it's through lean manufacturing, other quality management systems, they find a way to balance the two out. What we did through our collective bargaining reforms was empower not just our state but our local governments to do the same, so that we made it affordable to live, to work, to employ people in our state, to retire in our state, but also did it in a way that still empowered our schools and our local governments to have high quality services.
Right. And in closing, on the Florida Chamber's bottom line, you talked tonight about the importance of putting the next generation ahead of the next election. And at the Florida Chamber, we're working very closely with Governor Scott and our legislative leaders to do exactly that, to put the long term ahead of the short term. Can you talk, just give our members a sense of how important that is and what it meant to you in Wisconsin?
Well, and I would encourage, the good work you're doing with Governor Scott and lawmakers in this great state, is to go beyond just the elections. Elections are obviously important, and I've been involved in a lot of them in my state and around the country. But it's after the elections that when it really counts. When the new office holders come in, when others are in office, when they're trying to do big, bold things, that's the time when people really need to step up, to be engaged, to be supportive, to lend their support, to lend their, not just their prayers and their mental support, but also to get out, writing letters to the editor, putting out messages to employees, particularly as an employer. If you can tell, I mean, the great thing is, for anybody who's uncomfortable telling their employees who to vote for, I get that from a lot of employers. I'm sure you get that a lot here.
Sure.
But there's nothing wrong about, after an election, saying, here's a really important issue, and for us to be competitive, for example, we need to get the cost of frivolous lawsuits down. We need to get a better handle on that. For us to be competitive at both the state and the local level, we need to have the ability for governments to be able to control their pension and excessive benefit costs. Those are things that I think most taxpayers appreciate, and if they get the connection to what it means in terms of putting people to work in this state, I think that's a powerful force, and that's something that has to happen long after the election, when people are in the trenches trying to get things done.
Well, Governor Walker, thank you very much for your leadership, and thank you for being here in Florida to share your success and to encourage us in Florida to do the same.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
And to you, our viewers, thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Florida Chamber's Bottom Line.